Well, it's an absolute delight to introduce somebody who's so erudite and so brilliant as Dr. Subramanian Swamy, an outspoken politician, a crusader for probity in public life, a great legal mind who has shown how effectively one can use the justice system to fight in public interest. But what often gets relegated to the background is how brilliant he is as an economist. And he makes a return to this core with his book, Reset, Regaining India's Economic Legacy. Dr. Swamy studied mathematics at Delhi University and did his master's from the Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta. His PhD in economics was from Harvard University in 1965 under the guidance of Nobel laureate Simon Kuznets. Had he continued in academics, Dr. Swamy could perhaps be a candidate for the Nobel Prize himself. After all, he was one of the 4 favorite students of Paul Samuelson, and 3 of them have won Nobel Prize. And very recently, as you must have read, that when he was in China attending a conference on China's 70 years of communist rule, he was invited there along with another person who was a Nobel laureate, who stood up and said, before I speak, I must first congratulate and acknowledge my debt to my guru, my teacher over here who's sitting, that was Dr. Subramanian Swamy. So Nobel is all around him except he himself not in Nobel. I would like to quote from an obituary he wrote in 2013 when Professor Paul Samuelson passed away. It's an extremely touching and a very humorous episode. He writes, I was already a bit of a sensation in academia because as an MS student at the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, I had published a research paper in the world's then most prestigious journal, Econometrica. That paper demolished P.C. Maulanabis's claim to fame called fractal graphical analysis using integral calculus. Maulanabis was invited by the editor to rebut my criticism, but he had no answer. In an early class of Samuelson, I interrupted his lecture to say, you have one equation wrong, so you will not be able to prove the theorem. There was a stunned silence in the class. Samuelson then walked to where I was seated and glowered. What did you say? I held my ground and I offered to rectify what was a small careless mistake which all geniuses commit on the blackboard in the class. He made me go to the blackboard and write out the correct equation, which I did. He then said, see me after the class. My classmates thought that was the end of me, and one even said to me, have you got a return ticket to India yet? But it was instead the beginning of a lifelong beautiful relationship. When I saw him after the class, he said to my utter joy, I think you and I should write a joint paper someday. And this we did 10 years later. In 1974, Professor Samuelson and Dr. Swamy authored a joint paper titled Invariant Economic Index Numbers and Canonical Duality, Survey and Synthesis, which has formed the basis for theories that points out to difficulties for economists in monitoring monetary policies. This is also known in the world as the famous Samuelson-Swamy theory of index numbers. This theorem came to be very interestingly applied very recently in 2016 when Dr. Swamy was the first to warn, first of course in 2015, but in 2016, July, he tweeted, if I apply Samuelson-Swamy theory of index numbers to India's GDP calculation or RBI interest rates, the media will scream anti-party activity. Another important phase pertains to Dr. Swamy's stint at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi was when he published the Swadeshi Plan, a monograph that was presented in the parliament by former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. There is more about it in the book, but let's just say that his ideas about market-friendly alternative to the first 5-year plans, which would get us a 10% GDP growth even at that time, didn't go down well with the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who of course had vested interests, political and otherwise, and she ridiculed it in the parliament, calling him a Santa Claus. It led to Swamy's unemployment at IIT Delhi being terminated in 1972. And of course, being a fighter, he won a 20-year battle with IIT Delhi for wrongful dismissal and was reinstated, but he resigned the very next day because he was already a politician and didn't want the job. He also recovered his back salary and emoluments with 8% interest over 2 decades. Dr. Swamy joined Jayaprakash Narayan's Sarvodaya movement and entered the Rajya Sabha in 1974. He held important positions as a minister and planning commission member under the Janata government, and again in 1991 in the Chandrasekhar government, where he was the one who really put through India's liberalization efforts. He simplified trade procedures, formulated an export strategy which became the forerunner of trade reforms adopted later. In one of the strangest episodes of Indian politics, he was appointed as a chairman of the Commission on Labour Standards and International Trade by Narasimha Rao in 1994. Now this was a cabinet rank post which Dr. Swamy held as an opposition party member in a Congress government. It was the first time I think something like this has happened in India. Interestingly, the commission was part of the Commerce Ministry, and since he was a cabinet rank, the Minister of State reporting to Dr. Swamy was a gentleman called Mr. P. Chidambaram, who is currently in Tihar jail. There is lots of such fabulous stories of him, how he came to the parliament, paid his attendance, and he went out as a Sikh back to the US during the emergency. But I will end my introduction.
The Association of the Publisher, Rupert Publishers, and the leadership of the Virat Hindustan Sangam, which is led by Jagdish Sethi, and ladies and gentlemen in this August hall of the Bombay Stock Exchange, thank you very much for coming. I'm particularly happy to see the Consul General of China here. I'm sure that we have both a lot to learn from each other, and I hope such cooperations continue in the future. I've just come back from a trip where I had an opportunity to meet a lot of important people in that, thanks to the help given by the Chinese Consul General here, who made the trip possible. I think two of us have a lot to learn from each other because our experiences have been similar, and we are neighbors. And some of the things I'm going to say today would draw on the experience of China. I have divided my book into 4 parts, but all of them deal with the role of government. What was the role of government and how the difference was made in the results. The first was when we had in India a foreign government. It was the British who directly ruled us, not all over India, but about 600 princely states were indirectly ruled. The king was there, but a regent of the British government was placed in that government of the king to oversee that they don't go against British interests. But by and large, the princely states conducted their own economic policy. Now, from 1870 to 1947, the British ruled India. And then thereafter, the Congress party, which led, at that time was an omnibus party which led us to freedom, ruled the country up till 1967. Then there was off and on coalitions, and ultimately of the 70 years, about 56 years was ruled by the Congress party. And in 1990, a new government of the Janata party came into power with Chandrasekhar as Prime Minister. I was the senior most minister of that government. And I held 2 portfolios, law and commerce. And we began examining what alternatives we had, because suddenly we found that the foreign exchange reserves had been completely exhausted during the VP Singh period. And consequently, these payments became due and we didn't have enough foreign exchange. These foreign debt could not be serviced, so it was a question of default. Fortunately, the Americans wanted our assistance at that time for the Gulf War, and I negotiated a deal with the Americans that they will give us how much money we need to service our foreign exchange in allowing the American planes to land in India, refuel, and then go on. The planes were coming in from Philippines, they landed in India, refueled, and then went on to fight the war with Iraq in Kuwait. So we escaped that time, but then the idea came that if this is the way our economy will find itself time and again without policy, we need a new policy, and that's how the question of a change in the socialist policy of the previous government began. Thereafter, Narasimha Rao came because the government of Chandrasekhar didn't last very long, and elections were held, and Narasimha Rao's government came to office, and he asked me to join the government. And first I agreed, but then he made a condition, I must join the Congress party. I said, that I cannot do. He said, why? I said, because the Congress party is owned by the Nehru family, you're just a tenant. And therefore, I don't want to join with you in the tenancy. So then he found this other way by appointing me as chairman of commission with cabinet rank. And Narasimha Rao then asked me to produce all the papers that had got through the cabinet of Chandrasekhar's, and he said, share it with me. We brought it to I gave it to him. Then we sat together, and he had made Manmohan Singh a finance minister who in Chandrasekhar's government was the economic advisor to our government. And I had in fact brought Manmohan Singh from Geneva to be our economic advisor. So there was a team, there was Montek Singh who was the finance secretary, who was my commerce secretary in the previous government. So this team put together a plan how to go about it based on what I had produced for the previous government. I must say, to the credit of Mr. Narasimha Rao, that 95% of the credit for the economic reforms of the country goes to him and only 5% to the others. Because he bore the brunt of the criticism. His party was not happy. In fact, after he ceased to be Prime Minister in 1996, an inquiry commission was set up under Mr. Antony about whether the policies, economic policies pursued during the Narasimha Rao period were in national interest. And that commission concluded against him. And Narasimha Rao was then ill-treated throughout till he passed away, I think in 2007 or so. So therefore, at that time there was a shock that such a change had taken place. It was against the grain of the Congress party, even though Narasimha Rao tried to explain that the socialist model that was based on the Soviet experience is not workable in India. Because Soviet model never worked anywhere in the world. People used to say, do propaganda saying that there is no inflation in Soviet Union, there is no poverty in Soviet Union, and there is no unemployment in Soviet Union. And all we found in 1990 is that there is no Soviet Union also now. It's broken into 16 countries. And now we know, when we compare East Germany and West Germany, North Korea and South Korea, how much difference there is between a market economy and a centralized thing. So till 1990, the centralized system was from 1947. We only produced a 3.5% growth rate. It's a very, very small growth rate. And the communist thinkers used to hide behind the phrase that this 3.5% is actually the Hindu rate of growth, when it was in fact the communist rate of growth. In 1990 onwards, our growth rate started increasing because we started liberalizing, removing controls and quotas and all these. And in the process, by the fourth year of Narasimha Rao's government, the GDP growth rate rose to 8%, which people used to say was impossible for India, because India is like an elephant, it must go slowly, and that's why they called it a Hindu rate of growth of 3.5%. So we suddenly found ourselves in an economic boom. Previously, you could get only one car called the Hindustan, for which you had to stand in a queue or you had to have a waiting period. Then this liberalization took place. Today, there's so many cars that we wish that we go back to the era of Hindustan again. But the fact of the matter is that the wide variety of goods and things and the rise in the GDP was due to liberalization. But unfortunately, after Narasimha Rao's period, the third phase began, which has been mostly an ad hoc thing, right from his successor, Deva Gowda, and then Inder Gujral, then Atal Bihari Vajpayee, then Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh as a finance minister was very good, but as a prime minister was useless as far as economic reforms was concerned. This again proves the key role that Narasimha Rao played. If Manmohan Singh couldn't bring economic reform as a prime minister, then how did he bring about economic reforms as a finance minister? And that was because Narasimha Rao was the one who was the guiding force of this. And I do wish that this coming Republic Day, Narasimha Rao gets a Bharat Ratna, which he deserves. Now, the problem basically is, why is it that it was very easy at the time of Narasimha Rao to say, abolish this, abolish that, and open up the economy. But now we are in a new situation, where we need policy to do something positive to make the economy grow. We have not been able to cross that 8% growth rate limit achieved during Narasimha Rao's period, because we have not understood the kind of policies we need to raise it to a higher rate of growth. I have calculated in my book that if you want full employment in 10 years, then for 10 years you must grow at 10% per year, not at 8% per year, or even 9% per year. 10% is the minimum growth rate you should achieve. Is it achievable? For that you need a set of new policies. Unfortunately, in our government, we have not understood that there is a fundamental difference between policy which depends on the macroeconomics of an economy and the microeconomics of daily activity. So you find our Prime Minister, creating a lot of waves about Ujjwala, about Make in India, about a number of things, you see, which are all bilateral issues between people, between him and the people, between the government and the people. But economy is a multilateral, multivariable macro system where you do something here, it has an effect there. This, I give you an example of Raghuram Rajan, who was governor of Reserve Bank, and he gave a thesis, and he was not an economist, he was a finance man, and he was an MBA from IIM and a PhD from MIT, but he has finance is all bilateral. He knows there, Professor Vaidyanathan knows that it's a bilateral issue, but in the case of economics, of growth, it's a multilateral issue. Supposing I lower the wage rate in the country, by policy I bring down the wage rate, will that increase employment? Well, normally those who look at it as a micro think that if you lower the wages, then labor becomes cheap, so more will be employed. But that's not how it works in a macroeconomic. If you lower the wages, you're lowering the purchasing power of the people also. Those who are workers, their purchasing power will go down, which means demand will go down. If demand goes down, then you will have recession. And that's what has happened when Mr. Raghuram Rajan said, I must raise interest rates to control inflation. But what happened actually? When you raise the interest rates in the name of controlling inflation, the cost of capital went up. So small and medium industries which totally depended on loan financing, they found all of a sudden their costs going up and they started closing down. And today's increase in unemployment is due to high interest rates. And therefore, we must now give up this policy of high interest rates and bring the interest rates down. Second is similarly, you need resources, so put income tax. But if you don't have the capacity to collect it, or collect it honestly, what's the use of doing this, you see? Today, people are frightened to pay income tax. So therefore, because they don't know, even if you honestly file your income tax returns, even then the inspector fellow comes and he wants to find some excuse to get you in trouble. So why do you want income tax? Because you want resources. Why you want resources? Because you want to invest in the economy. But there are other ways of doing it. Supposing I advocate abolish income tax. If you abolish income tax, then what will happen? The people will be happy. I'm sure all of you will be happy. Wouldn't you like income tax to be abolished? So my friend said, no, why abolish? Reduce it. But if you reduce it, the income tax inspectors will still remain and they'll still visit your houses. So make a clean break, like Narasimha Rao did. All license, quotas, everything he abolished in one blow. People said, reduce it slowly, slowly. He said, no, I will do it all together. And that's why we are successful. Today, if you want this corruption that is arisen from the income tax collections, if you want that to say, abolish income tax. Order the CRP to go and put a lock in the Ayakar Bhavan in Delhi, in Indraprastha estate, and say, no more income tax you have to pay. And it's not something absurd. Today, agriculture doesn't pay income tax. Zero income tax in agriculture. And in the urban sector also, poor people who are below the poverty line, they don't pay any income tax. Rich people have chartered accountants. I don't want to insult chartered accountants here, but they will do the, contingency, liability, they'll put it in one corner and so on. They will create expenses, expenditure, tax deductible expenditure and so on, and they won't end up paying much. Who pays the income tax in our country? It is the middle class. This is the new entrepreneurs who come into the field. These are the people who are paying the income tax because they are being directly confronted by that system, and they are not in a position to make out all these deductions and so on and escape income tax. So empower the middle class to raise their level of savings. In our country, households provide 80% of the total savings in the country. The corporate sector and the government sector, they only provide the remaining 20%. 80% is provided by the households, and we are harassing them the most. So if you abolish income tax, in my opinion, what will happen is the rate of savings will go up, the rate of savings goes up, the rate of growth will go up. So that is the way to raise the growth rate. Make these macro changes. And you have to make other changes too. Agriculture, it has the cheapest. Most of our agricultural products internationally are very low priced compared to. Take the price of rice, take basmati rice and compare it with a similar quality rice in Japan. Japan is 6 times the rate in India. Same thing within South African rice. Similarly, wheat, 1/4 the price. The American wheat costs 4 times Indian price. Milk, which is Europe imports from some other countries, from many of the other countries, that is 6 times the price of milk in India. But there are the agriculture has no facility to export. So we need a new policy map in which the country uses the market to get its work done. China successfully did it by importing semi-processed goods from East Asia, added value to it, made it into a final product, and then sold it to Europe and America. And because Chinese labor was cheap, they found it profitable to bring the semi-processed goods from East Asia and then add value to it and send it to United States. East Asia could no more send it directly to Europe and America because their labor had become expensive. Now Chinese labor is also getting expensive. So India has got an opportunity to divert that and see that it takes the market. Otherwise, other countries will take it up. Bangladesh, has already taken up the garment exports and so on. So this is where economics comes in. But in talking just in Luke's terms, we have to understand today what the problem is. Our growth rate has been declining. It's not only declining from the day we took power. From 2011, if you see the trend is downwards. The peak was reached in Manmohan Singh's period of 8% in some time in 2011, and then it started declining. And it's been declining. Today it's gone down to 5.5%. I'm sure it's going to go down further. I don't want to scare it and tomorrow see in the papers that the stock market has collapsed after Swamy addressed a meeting in the stock exchange. So therefore, India is full of abundance. You want water, desalinate seawater. Every day we are fighting between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. When the rain season is over, you'll see that the fight will start. Why? Because Tamil Nadu wants Kaveri water. And Karnataka says there's not enough Kaveri water. So people confront me and ask me, what is your stand on Kaveri water? I say, you want water or you want Kaveri water? If you want water, I can desalinate seawater and give it to you, and there will be no shortage. The whole of Israel gets 24 hours a day water in their tanks by desalination of seawater. Saudi Arabia has copied that technology. Even though they don't like Israel, they've taken the technology from there. So innovation is a very crucial part. We have 60% of the world's thorium, and we are not using it in our nuclear reactors. We are importing uranium from abroad. There's no shortage of this country. That's why this country was once upon a time the most prosperous country in the world till about 1700. And now we have got 70% of our population below the age of 35. The average age of an Indian today is only 26 years old. What's the average age of Chinese? 35, because of this one child per family policy that they pursued. And Americans, 37. 37 years is the average age of an American. And it would have been even more if they didn't have this immigration from Philippines and Mexico and other places. And what about Europe? It is 45%. Japan is 50%. 50 years is the average age of a Japanese. And we have got this young population. Educate them, make them go in for risky projects to find innovations, succeed sometimes, fail sometimes, but find a way by upgrading our technology. We can do it. We are doing it abroad. We don't know. I don't understand why you can't do it in India. So the package I have drawn up is how agriculture can become self-sufficient by becoming an export sector. To industry using labor more efficiently and encouraging people to invest, not government invest, but people to invest by lowering interest rates and making taxes in such a way that people feel satisfied that I've earned and I've kept most of it. And then if you ask them, you please donate without even paying, without being levied a tax, people will donate in our country. Giving donations in our country, people have done it whenever there's a crisis. When the Chinese, India-China war took place in 1962, there was an open demand that we have no money for defense, please give. Women took off their bangles, their Mangal Sutra, everything, and put it in the box for defense support. So our people, if appealed to properly, not pushed around, if you press our people, frighten our people, they'll find some other way to come around it. After all, the emergency demonstrated that the people, even if they are uneducated, still prefer freedom, and they voted Mrs. Gandhi out in the emergency. Let's not forget that. So what I would suggest is that we need today a method by which our economy can have a policy for short run, a policy for medium term, and a policy for long run. That is not there today. And I'm afraid it's the economists that the government of India has recruited, they all seem too frightened to tell the truth to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister himself is focused only on on micro projects. So therefore, the kind of policies we need not being there. People ask me, why doesn't the government consult you? Because I'm not only an economist, but I'm also a politician. So therefore, if I succeed, then, you know, I might get some ideas in my head. So therefore, there is a fear that he's uncontrollable. Well, therefore, I suppose I'll have to wait till the crisis gets very bad. Then, of course, they will have to come to me to seek my help. So I brought this book out to show to you. Finally, I want to say to you that what I want to say to you is that we have a tradition which we must not forget. We cannot imitate, ape the West in their models. Theirs is a purely materialistic society. And that materialistic society, the more money you make, the higher is your social status. In our country, it's not like that. It's never been like that. In fact, when I first went as a student to Harvard, my American classmate asked me, how can you people accept Mahatma Gandhi as your leader? So I said, why? He said, he's not properly dressed. He's half naked. He's just got a piece of cloth around his loin. How can you accept that as a leader? So then I asked him, in America, does a leader have to be well dressed? He said, of course. He must be in the best tie. He must have the most shining shoes. He must have, fully washed shirt. You can see their leaders, how well dressed they are. You can see the spiritual leaders also. The Pope, how well dressed the Pope is, or the Imam in Makkah. But our sadhus and sannyasis just want bhagwa kapda. They may have a lot of money like Ramdev, but still they will have only bhagwa. So this simplicity is translated into a concept of a person who's a jnani and a tyagi. And he is placed at the highest in our society. Unfortunately, that system we evolved of division of labor, that has become ossified and it has become, in some sense, cruel also. But we must understand that birth has got nothing to do. Birth has got nothing to do one's ability, if a proper education is given. Dr. Ambedkar came from a scheduled caste community and from a poorest of the poorest in the Mahar community. He went to Columbia in 1916 and got a PhD in economics. And then went on to London, got a Doctor of Science degree from London School of Economics. Later took a law degree, came back to India, and he became the chairman of the drafting committee of our constitution. Such was the thing, because he had got good education. And Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru went to Cambridge and failed. That's not surprising, because I don't think that any member of the Nehru family has ever passed an exam. But that doesn't matter. It's a question of mental attitude. And that mental attitude is that anyone and everyone who's given an equal opportunity to education would rise to become to his full potential, and he can contribute. And we've got this young population, motivate them to innovate, because innovation is 60% of the growth in those countries which have become developed. In our country, it is only 30%. 70% is by more capital and more labor. But the more you put capital, more you put labor into the production system, you reach a law of diminishing returns, and you get less and less. So, first of all, do this by this scientific method. Second, please develop a society which values money only if you donate the surplus money you have to the society. You give, and the highest value should be attached to learning and simple living. That is what Deen Dayal Upadhyaya has said is the Indian way, and that was which he called as integral humanism. Otherwise, pure material pursuit will lead to, ultimately will lead to the destruction of society. India is the only civilization that has survived out of the 45 civilizations that UNESCO has tabulated. The pharaohs, Egypt, that disappeared. Greece disappeared. Mesopotamia disappeared, Babylon disappeared. All these civilizations have disappeared because they were single-dimensional materialistic society. But India is the only one out of the 45 nations of ancient civilization which has a continuing civilization, an unbroken civilization, and this is because we balance material prosperity with spiritual advancement. So that has to be there also as a part. We should not just chase material prosperity. I would say India is blessed with the fact that whenever there is a crisis, we rise up. There was a crisis of food in 1965. That time Lal Bahadur Shastri became Prime Minister and he brought Green Revolution by just preparing a package of water, fertilizer, seeds and so on, and gave it to 10% of the farmers, and they produced the Green Revolution. We had a foreign exchange crisis in 1990 and we had economic reform. So if a crisis comes tomorrow, please don't be disappointed. Be happy it has come. Maybe pray that it comes quickly so that we can now rise to a new height. Indian society has survived all through these years, whereas Soviet Union broke up into 16 countries, Yugoslavia has broken up into 4, Pakistan is broken up into 2, Indonesia has broken up to 2. It's the only country which has been predicted that will fall apart, but has never fallen apart because of the fact that we have also been a spiritual society along with our material prosperity. So economics must also temper with its culture that just making profit at the expense of somebody else is not the way to go, but have it done it in a cooperative way. And that is what we call as integral humanism. I am sure that this crisis that is coming, which will come probably in the next 6 months, in a big way with institutions collapsing, if the rectification is not done, we will turn it around because of our past history and our capability. So I'm not worried about the future. But I'm telling you the way to go is to consider a comprehensive macro model for India, which will make our every sector grow instead of one sector or another sector. Thank you very much.